In 2018, a woman in Houston called 911. She was in her car. She had just witnessed an accident on the highway, a serious one. Vehicles off the road, people who needed help immediately. She dialed, the call connected, and the dispatcher who answered had no idea where she was. Not approximately, not within a few miles. No idea. The woman tried to describe her location, the highway, the direction she was traveling, the exit she had passed. The dispatcher asked questions, tried to narrow it down, tried to build a picture of where on the Houston highway system this accident had occurred. It took 4 minutes. 4 minutes of a dispatcher trying to locate a caller who was standing next to people who needed immediate medical attention. 4 minutes during which the ambulance and the fire trucks and the police cars sat in their stations waiting for an address. 4 minutes is a long time when someone is bleeding. When the story came out, when the local news covered it, when the details were reported, people were outraged, demanded answers, wanted to know how this was possible in 2018 when their phone knew their location to within a few feet, when apps on their phone could summon a car to their precise location in under 2 minutes. How could 911 not know where they were? The answer is a story that almost no one knows. A story about a system built in the 1960s, patched and extended and jury-rigged across 6 decades, that has never been fully replaced and that still, right now, today, fails in ways that cost lives. A story about the most important phone call most people will ever make, and the infrastructure behind it that is older than the call itself. The system is called 911. You know the number. You do not know what happens when you dial it. And what happens is far stranger than you think.
Before there was 911, there was nothing. This is not a figure of speech. Before 1968, the United States had no universal emergency number, no single number you could call to reach police or fire or an ambulance, no system that routed emergency calls to the right agency. If you needed help, you called the police department directly, which meant knowing the phone number of your local police department, which meant looking it up in the phone book, which meant knowing which jurisdiction you were in, city police or county sheriff or state police, depending on where exactly you were standing. If you were visiting a city you didn't know, if you were on a highway between jurisdictions, if you were a child who couldn't read a phone book, if it was the middle of the night and you were in a panic, you might not know who to call. You might not be able to reach anyone. People died because of this, not hypothetically. Documented cases, studied by public health researchers, of deaths that occurred because the time spent identifying and reaching the right emergency service was too long. In 1957, the National Association of Fire Chiefs recommended that a single universal emergency number be established, a number anyone could call from anywhere that would connect them to help. It took 11 years. In 1967, President Lyndon Johnson's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration of Justice recommended a universal emergency number. The FCC worked with AT&T to establish one. In 1968, AT&T announced that 911 would be that number. On February 16, 1968, in Haleyville, Alabama Speaker of the House Tom Bevel made the first ever 911 call. The person who answered was a local police chief named Ralph Sides. Sides picked up a red telephone specially installed for the occasion and said hello. Bevel said hello back. That was the first 911 call in American history. And the infrastructure that would eventually carry every 911 call in America, The system that would grow to handle 240 million calls per year began with two men saying hello to each other on a red telephone in a small town in Alabama. The system built to support them was not designed for what it eventually became. It was not designed for a world of suburbs. It was not designed for 1968. And significant portions of it are still running on that design.
The original 911 system worked like this. When you called 911 from a landline telephone, the call traveled through the telephone network to a public safety answering point, a PSAP, a dispatch center, the room with the dispatchers and the headsets and the screens. The telephone network knew which PSAP to route your call to because landline telephones have fixed locations. Your home phone is registered to your address is in a database, the database tells the network which PSAP serves that address. When your call arrived at the PSAP, the dispatcher's screen showed your address automatically. They knew where you were before you said a word. They could dispatch help to your location immediately, even if you couldn't speak, even if you were incapacitated, even if the call was made by a child who didn't know their address. For landline phones, this system worked. It worked well. It was one of the genuinely elegant pieces of emergency infrastructure in American history. The problem arrived in 1983. That was the year Motorola introduced the Dynatac 8000X, the first commercially available cellular phone. The Dynatac was enormous. It weighed nearly 2 pounds. It cost nearly $4,000. It had 30 minutes of battery life. And it had no fixed location. A cell phone, by its nature, moves. It connects to different towers depending on where it is. Its location is not registered in a database the way a landline's location is registered. When someone called 911 from a cell phone, the PSAP received the call and the dispatcher's screen showed nothing. No address, no location, nothing. The dispatcher had to ask, the caller had to know, and if the caller didn't know, if they were on an unfamiliar road or disoriented or injured, or if the caller was a child, the dispatcher couldn't find them. This was a known problem from the moment cell phones became commercially available. It was documented, studied, reported on, and it was not solved for 15 years.
In 1996, the FCC issued a rule called the Enhanced 911 Mandate, E911. The rule required cellular carriers to implement technology that would provide caller location to PSAPs. Phase 1, within 18 months, carriers had to be able to identify which cell tower a 911 call was coming from and provide the callback number of the calling phone. Phase 2, within several years after that, carriers had to be able to provide the precise location of the caller, latitude and longitude, accurate to within 50 to 300 meters depending on the technology used. Phase 2 was the hard part. There were two main approaches: network-based location, using the signals from multiple cell towers to triangulate the phone's position, and handset-based location, using GPS chips in the phone to determine position directly. Both approaches had limitations. Network-based location was less precise. Handset-based location required GPS chips in phones, which in 1996 were expensive, power-hungry, and not universally available. The carriers lobbied. The timelines were extended, waivers were granted. The implementation of E911 Phase 2 stretched from its original deadline into the 2000s. By the time GPS chips became standard in smartphones, by the time the iPhone arrived in 2007 with its built-in GPS, the technical problem of locating a cell phone caller was largely solvable. Solvable, but not solved. Because solving the technical problem was only part of the challenge. The other part was the infrastructure that received the location information, the PSAPs, the dispatch centers, the systems that processed 911 calls and displayed information to dispatchers. Those systems had been built for landline calls in 1968. They had been updated incrementally for decades, but they were fundamentally the same architecture, the same conceptual design, in many cases the same actual software and hardware that had been there from the beginning. And that architecture was not designed to receive GPS coordinates from a smartphone. It was designed to receive an address from a landline database. Getting location information from a GPS-equipped smartphone to a dispatcher screen required not just the phone to know its location, it required every system between the phone and the screen, the cellular network, the 911 routing infrastructure, the PSAP software, to be capable of receiving, transmitting, and displaying that information. In 2018, when the woman in Houston spent 4 minutes describing her location to a dispatcher, her iPhone knew exactly where she was, to within a few meters. The system that carried her call to the dispatcher could not deliver that information, because the system was not built for it.
There are approximately 6,000 public safety answering points in the United States. 6,000 separate dispatch centers, operated by counties, cities, municipalities, and sometimes private contractors, each one responsible for the 911 calls within its jurisdiction. Each one is different. Different software, different hardware, different databases, different procedures, different levels of funding, different ages of equipment. Some PSAPs run on systems that were installed in the 1990s and have been patched and extended ever since. Some run on systems from the 2000s. A small number have been upgraded to modern infrastructure. Very few are fully capable of receiving the kind of precise location data that a modern smartphone can provide. The National Emergency Number Association, NENA, the organization that sets standards for 911 systems, has documented this in detail. A significant portion of the country's PSAPs cannot receive or display accurate smartphone location data. A significant portion cannot receive text messages to 911, even though the FCC has required carriers to support text to 911 for years. Some PSAPs cannot transfer calls to other PSAPs electronically. If your call reaches the wrong dispatch center, the dispatcher has to tell you to hang up and call back, hoping you get routed correctly the second time. Some PSAPs in rural areas are staffed by part-time employees or volunteers who work other jobs and answer 911 calls as a secondary duty. The system that is supposed to be the most reliable emergency infrastructure in the country is, in practice, a patchwork, a collection of 6,000 separate systems built at different times by different vendors to different standards with wildly different capabilities. What holds it together is a routing infrastructure that was designed in the 1970s and that has been extended incrementally ever since. What holds it together is the telephone network. The old telephone network. The copper wire telephone network. That is being turned off.
For most of the history of 911, the calls traveled over what the industry calls the PSTN, the Public Switched Telephone Network, the traditional landline telephone system. The PSTN is a known quantity. It has been around for over a century. It is reliable in ways that newer technologies are still proving themselves against. It does not go down when the power goes out. Traditional landlines carry their own power through the copper wire. It does not depend on internet connectivity. 911 was built around the PSTN. The routing, the location databases, the call delivery mechanisms, all of it designed for a world where phone calls traveled over copper wire through telephone switching centers. That world is ending. The telephone companies are decommissioning the PSTN. AT&T, Verizon, and the other major carriers have been systematically shutting down their copper wire networks, replacing them with fiber optic internet connections and cellular systems. This is not secret. It is not sudden.
The FCC has been aware of it for years and has been managing the transition. But the transition has an enormous implication for 911. When the copper wire goes away, the infrastructure that 911 routing depends on goes away with it. The automatic location identification systems, the selective routing databases that send calls to the right PSAP, the dedicated circuits that carry 911 calls separately from ordinary telephone traffic. All of it built for copper, all of it requiring replacement as copper is decommissioned. The replacement is called NG 911, Next Generation 911, a system built on Internet protocols rather than telephone protocols, capable of handling not just voice calls, but text messages and video and precise GPS location data, a system that can route calls intelligently across jurisdictions, a system designed for the 21st century rather than the 1960s. NG 911 is real. It exists. It works. It is also, depending on where you live, years or decades away from being fully implemented. Because implementing NG 911 requires every PSAP in the country, all 6,000 of them, to upgrade their systems, requires the routing infrastructure to be rebuilt, requires training and procedures and funding. And 911 funding is a complicated, contentious, and chronically insufficient part of American public finance. You pay a 911 fee on your phone bill. You have paid it for years. You have probably never thought about where it goes. Where it goes is complicated.
Every state in America charges a 911 fee on telephone bills. Most states also charge it on wireless bills and on VoIP service bills. Collectively, Americans pay approximately $3 billion per year in 911 fees. $3 billion per year. That sounds like a lot. It is not, given what it is supposed to fund, but it is also not nothing. The problem is that a significant portion of that money does not go to 911. A Federal Communications Commission study found that many states divert 911 fee revenue to their general funds, not to upgrade PSAP equipment, not to train dispatchers, not to implement NG 911, to the general state budget to be spent on other things. The practice is called fee diversion. It is technically legal in most states. It is widely criticized by emergency management professionals. It has been documented and condemned in multiple federal reports, and it continues. In 2021, a Senate Commerce Committee report found that states had diverted approximately $1.7 billion in 911 fees over a 2-year period, money that was collected from consumers specifically for emergency services and spent on other things. While PSAPs ran on outdated equipment, while location accuracy remained inadequate, while NG 911 implementation fell further behind. The system that answers every 911 call in America is chronically underfunded by the very fees collected to fund it. Not because the people running it are incompetent, because the money collected for it is spent elsewhere. And the equipment that processes life or death calls gets older. Every year, a little older.
In 2014, a woman in Snohomish County, Washington, sent a text message to 911. She was hiding from her abusive partner. She could not make a voice call without being heard. She needed help but could not speak. Text to 911 had been available in her county. She sent the message. No one received it. The PSAP's system was not configured to receive texts. The message arrived at the routing infrastructure and stopped there. It did not appear on any dispatcher's screen. She was found eventually. She survived, not because the system worked, because someone came home. This case, and others like it, drove the FCC to mandate text to 911 capability from the major carriers. The carriers complied. The routing infrastructure was updated to carry text messages to PSAPs. But the PSAPs still had to be able to receive them. And many could not. As of recent assessments, a significant portion of PSAPs in the United States still cannot reliably receive text messages to 911. In some rural areas, text to 911 simply does not work. The FCC mandated it, the carriers implemented it. The last mile, the PSAP, the dispatch center, the actual system that receives and displays the message, has not kept up. This is the structure of the problem. Again and again, in different forms, the same structure. A mandate from the federal government, implementation by the carriers and the routing infrastructure, and then 6,000 PSAPs, each one responsible for its own upgrade, each one dependent on its own funding, each one on its own timeline. Some upgrade, some cannot afford to. Some are managed by jurisdictions that have other priorities. Some are running systems so old that upgrading them requires replacing everything, not just the text capability, but the entire infrastructure. And the texts from people who cannot speak go nowhere.
The most important recent development in 911 location accuracy is something called dispatchable location. The concept is straightforward. When you call 911, the system should be able to tell the dispatcher not just your GPS coordinates, but your dispatchable location, the actual address, including floor and unit number, that emergency responders can use to find you. GPS coordinates alone are not always sufficient. If you are in an apartment building, GPS tells the dispatcher that you are somewhere in a building that occupies a specific point on the map. It does not tell them which of the 200 apartments you are in. If you are in an office tower, GPS tells the dispatcher the building, but not the floor. First responders have arrived at large buildings, known the person who called 911 was somewhere inside, and been unable to find them. Dispatchable location is supposed to fix this. It requires that the 911 system be able to identify not just where a building is, but where within the building the caller is located. For landlines, this is straightforward. The address and unit number are in the database. For cell phones in buildings with modern systems, it can be provided through Wi-Fi positioning and barometric floor estimation that estimate floor level. The FCC issued rules requiring carriers and PSAPs to implement dispatchable location on a phased timeline beginning in 2021. Implementation has been uneven. Some jurisdictions are ahead of the timeline, many are behind it. The technology for determining indoor location is genuinely difficult. GPS signals don't penetrate buildings reliably. Wi-Fi positioning requires buildings to have Wi-Fi infrastructure configured to support it. Barometric floor estimation is accurate only within a range. The perfect solution does not yet exist. And while engineers and regulators and carriers work toward better solutions, dispatchers in cities across America are still receiving calls from people in large buildings with no information about which floor they are on. Still dispatching first responders to buildings and waiting for them to search. Still measuring the gap between what the technology can do and what the system delivers.
There's a particular kind of call that reveals the limits of 911 more clearly than any other. The call where the caller cannot speak. Domestic violence, a person hiding from someone in their home who cannot make a sound, a child who has found a phone but doesn't know their address, a medical emergency, a cardiac arrest, a stroke where the person who needs help cannot communicate. These are among the most common and most critical that dispatchers handle. For a landline call from a fixed address, they are manageable. The address is on the screen. The dispatcher can send help even if no one speaks. For a cell phone call, they are harder. Location is less precise. The callback number may not reach the caller again. The dispatcher must work with what they have. For a text message from someone hiding in silence, if the PSAP can receive it, they are manageable again. But the system was not designed for any of these scenarios. It was designed for a person who calls from home, knows their address, and can clearly state what help they need. The edge cases, the scenarios that represent some of the most desperate moments in human experience, are handled by dispatchers who are skilled and dedicated and working with tools that were not built for those scenarios. Working around the system rather than with it. Finding ways to do their jobs despite the infrastructure rather than because of it. Because the infrastructure is old and the emergencies are not.
The people who work in PSAPs, the dispatchers who answer 911 calls, occupy one of the most psychologically demanding positions in public safety. They are not first responders in the way that police officers and firefighters and paramedics are first responders. They do not go to the scene. They stay in the room with the screens and the headsets. But they are there for every call. Every cardiac arrest, every car accident, every house fire, every act of violence, every person in crisis, every child who is scared and doesn't know what to do. They are the first voice, the first human presence on the other end of the most important call of someone's life. And they do this work with tools that are, in many jurisdictions, old enough to have been new when their parents were in school. The burnout rate among 911 dispatchers is extraordinary. PTSD is common. The combination of chronic understaffing, 911 centers across the country report significant vacancy rates, and the pandemic made it worse. And the emotional weight of the work and the frustration of working with inadequate tools takes a toll that shows up in turnover rates that make the staffing problem worse, which makes the remaining dispatchers' jobs harder, which increases burnout, which increases turnover. The system does not just have aging infrastructure, it has a human infrastructure crisis that compounds the technological one. The person who answers your call, who may be the reason help reaches you in time, may be working their third consecutive shift because the center is short-staffed, may be handling 4 calls simultaneously, may be doing all of this on a system that was installed before they were born, and doing it somehow extraordinarily well, because the alternative is not acceptable.
NG 911. Next Generation 911 is not theoretical. It is not a plan on paper. It exists. States have been building it. Maryland has a functioning NG 911 network. So does Indiana. So does several other states. The infrastructure, Internet protocol-based call routing, capable of carrying voice and text and video and precise location data, has been proven to work. The states that have implemented it report significant improvements, dispatchers who can see precise locations, systems that can transfer calls between PSAPs electronically without asking the caller to hang up and redial, infrastructure that can receive text messages and video from callers. The future of 911 is being built. It is being built slowly, unevenly, in some places faster than others, in some places barely at all. The FCC has pushed for faster implementation. NEENA has advocated for it for years. Congress has appropriated some funding. The Infrastructure and Jobs Act of 2021 included $1 billion for NG 911 implementation. $1 billion sounds significant. Spread across 6,000 PSAPs across a country of 330 million people, replacing infrastructure that in some cases covers entire states. It is a start. It is not a solution. The full cost of implementing NG 911 across the entire country has been estimated at tens of billions of dollars. The timeline for full implementation at current funding levels runs into the 2030s for optimistic projections and beyond for realistic ones.
In the meantime, the current system continues. The old routing infrastructure handles the calls. The PSAPs, some modern, many not, receive them. And dispatchers bridge the gap between what the system can do and what people need it to do. There is a number that emergency management professionals cite when they talk about why this matters. The research on cardiac arrest, the most time-critical of medical emergencies, shows that survival rates drop by approximately 10% for every minute without treatment. 10% per minute. In a cardiac arrest, the difference between a dispatcher who knows your location immediately and a dispatcher who spends 3 minutes establishing your location is not an inconvenience. It is, statistically, a 30% reduction in your probability of survival. 3 minutes, 30%. Those 3 minutes are the gap between what the system should deliver and what the system actually delivers, in the jurisdictions and scenarios where location information is inadequate. The gap is not universal. In many places, for many calls, the system works well. Location is provided accurately, dispatchers receive the information they need, help arrives quickly. But in the places where it doesn't work, in the rural counties with aging equipment, in the large buildings where floor-level location can't be determined, in the jurisdictions where NG 911 is years away, the gap is real. And the gap has a cost, measured not in dollars, but in the 10% per minute that matters when someone's heart has stopped.
In October 2022, a teenager in Michigan sent a text message to 911. She was in her car. She had been in an accident on a rural road. She was injured. She could not make a voice call. Her county had text to 911 capability. The message was received. The dispatcher saw her location, not precise GPS coordinates, but a cell tower location that covered an area of several square miles of rural Michigan. The dispatcher asked follow-up questions via text. The teenager was injured and her responses were slow. She couldn't describe her location with precision. She didn't know the road she was on. It took 22 minutes for emergency services to locate her. She survived. Barely. Her story was written up in the local paper. The county 911 coordinator was quoted. The coordinator said they were aware of the location limitations, said they were working toward NG 911 implementation, said funding was the challenge, said what every 911 coordinator in every jurisdiction facing the same limitations says. We know. We're working on it. It takes time. It takes time. 22 minutes in Michigan in October. Is 21 minutes too long?
You have dialed 911, or you will, or someone you love will. Not because disaster is inevitable, but because the situations that produce 911 calls, accidents, medical emergencies, fires, the moments when the ordinary safety of daily life briefly fails, these things happen. They happen to careful people. They happen to lucky people. They happen regardless of how sensibly you live your life. When that call goes out, when you press those 3 numbers in a moment of fear or panic or grief, something happens on the other end. A dispatcher somewhere picks up a headset. A screen shows whatever information the system can provide. A human being's voice comes through and says words that, in that moment, are among the most reassuring words in the English language. 911, what's your emergency? And behind that voice, behind that dispatcher, behind that screen, behind the headset and the console, is a system built across 60 years, assembled from thousands of pieces by thousands of different organizations,
funded inadequately, updated unevenly, staffed by people doing extraordinary work with tools that are frequently not equal to the task. A system that handles 240 million calls per year, that works most of the time well enough to matter, that fails sometimes in ways that cost the minutes that cost the lives, and that is being rebuilt, slowly, with insufficient funding, against the relentless pressure of the emergencies it must handle in the meantime, into something better. Not yet finished, not yet good enough, but being built. By the people who answer the phone at 2 a.m. in the counties that can barely afford the equipment they have. By the engineers designing the NG 911 systems that will eventually replace what is there now. By the dispatchers who bridge the gap between what the system delivers and what the moment requires. By the FCC and NENA and the emergency management professionals who have been pushing for better for decades. So, the next time you see the number 911, on a sign, in a TV show, on the back of a police car passing on the street, think for a moment about what is behind it.
About the 6,000 dispatch centers, the aging equipment, the funding diverted to other purposes, the dispatchers on their third shift, the rural counties where text to 911 still doesn't work, the large buildings where no one knows which floor you're on. Think about the gap between the number, 3 digits, simple, universal, the thing you have known since you were old enough to know anything, and the system behind it, which is not simple, which is not universal, which is not equal to the promise that 3 digits make. Not yet. Somewhere, right now, in a room with screens and headsets and the constant low hum of a system handling emergencies, a dispatcher is picking up, saying those words, doing the job, with what they have, for whoever is calling, hoping the system holds. It usually does. Usually is not always, and always is what 911 is supposed to be.